Hi everyone. Okay, today we are a little bit late getting going on these videos. So my apologies to the class if you were expecting them about an hour or so ago, but we're going to get them posted. I'm going to go through them quickly just to get you the information. We're sort of in the waning days of the semester here. We're getting close to final exam time. So let's just go ahead and be very detailed with exactly what it is that you need to get out of these PowerPoints, and we will move on. So what this lesson is for today is it's actually two parts, all right? So it's organizational communication. Then we're also going to get into discussions on media and how the media creates narratives, right? So if we think about sort of business organizations, that's one way of thinking about organizations. But then also there's sort of like larger cultural stories that sort of pair with there's overlap, right? So that's what we're talking about today. And so there's going to be two different videos uploaded. So this is the first one, just on some of the basics of organizational communication. When it comes to OrgComm, we break it down into two functions as to why organizations sort of have some cohesiveness. The first is relational, right? So you can think about, this fits into the conversations also with like family communication, your friendships, right? You can think about them in organizations in a less business sense, but they're relational, right? There is a need for human connection. Sports teams could be considered. You see this overlap of they are going to perform a task, right? A basketball team wants to win a game, but they also form familial relationships with one another. All right, the second function of a small group is task oriented. So this is more in the business line of things, right? You get together with some people at your business and you say, okay, we have 6 months to sort of create and launch this new product. The task is to complete, the work in front of us in order to sort of achieve a goal. Now, obviously, both of these, relationship and task functions of a group, they aren't exclusive. So you might have a strong relationship function with your family as a group, but then there are going to be some tasks like making decisions with regard to where to eat dinner, or who's gonna, how are we gonna cook dinner and set the table, how are we gonna decide how to go to on vacation, who has various chores around the house. So there are tasks that are a part of these relationships these primary relationship groups. And again, the same is true with task-oriented groups. You have a task in front of you, but then you also sort of, create, connections with people that are beyond just the task at hand. You say, okay, after work, we've worked on this project. I've gotten to know you. You seem like a cool person. Let's all of us, after we're done with this task, go out for, happy hour, or, I'm going to have a little barbecue. Why don't you come over? Right. So there is this overlap. What you do need to decide in these various groups that you're a part of is to figure out what is the primary reason for you to be there, right? So you might have tasks that you need to perform with your family, chores around the house, dinner, etc. But my guess is that the primary reason that you continue to have cohesion with your family is the relationship. So if you do that, then it's like, okay, I want to keep the relationship primary in the front of my mind because I never want to have a task conflict override the relationship aspect. I don't want to ruin our relationship by having a fight about something that's task based. And it could be the flip with regard to a basketball team or a business opportunity. You could say, look, we might have relationship problems, but I never want those emotions to take the place of us really focusing on winning a championship or making sure that we have this product launch in order so that we can make profit this quarter and what have you. So you just have to sort of figure out which is going to be sort of our primary concern. And if our primary concern is task, winning the game, then it's like, look, you and I have problems with each other, but we're both on the same team together. So right now we need to take all of our personal problems and forget about them because we need to win a game. All right. So that's how all of this stuff works. When it comes to communication networks, you have formal and informal ways of communicating. So again, if you think about work, you might have like daily emails that come out to you from your boss, right? Like a memo once a day, that's a formal way of communication. But you also have informal ways of talking with people in the office. These are pretty self-explanatory, right? in the hallway. How you doing? How's your family? How was your weekend? Like water cooler talk. Did you see the football game last week? Whatever. All right. Now with communication at work, this gets very interesting, especially as we move into a more hybrid form of work where we are working from home and our days aren't necessarily 9 to 5. Our days are sort of, maybe a little bit in the morning, take a long lunch, maybe a little bit in the afternoon. Okay, I'll work a little bit Saturday because we're always connected, right? On our phones, on our laptops. This is one of those things I give people advice, like you have to make your own boundaries. So for me, you all know my boundaries if you're in my class. It's like I don't like 5 o'clock on Friday. I don't look at my email again until Monday morning. Um, so if you email me, if you're a student of mine and you email me late on Friday and you need something that needs like for an assignment that's due Monday morning, I'm not going to get back to you. And that's just so that I find a way to not be connected to work 24/7. All right. So you might have to figure out your own boundaries because there's so much overlap. Now, with this overlap of work with regard to work sort of being pervasively 24/7 these days, we also get these weird conversations with regard to what's appropriate and inappropriate types of communication at work, right? So if somebody calls me after hours and I'm at home, and they're a colleague from work, you get in this space of like, what's the sort of like appropriate professional way to communicate with somebody if we are communicating sort of during a non-work time or in a non-work atmosphere. So think about your social media accounts, right? Um, I wish we lived in a world where, whatever it is you decide to do sort of in your social media world, I wish it didn't have an effect on people's jobs. I wish that we could just all come to a truce, as humanity that said, look, like we are going to completely have this line or this big wall between how we communicate at work 9 to 5 and all the weird stuff that people do and say on the internet. All right. However, we know that's not the case. All right. However, I don't want to live in a world where I have to be sort of on and professional 24/7. I don't want to have to be professional in my house, on every Zoom conversation I have, on my social media all the time, when I'm out in public. Like nobody wants to do that. But because our life is so broadcast constantly in this internet age, people do feel this pressure of constantly having to sort of be on sort of in work professional mode. All right. Yeah. So if you're having like happy hour over at your house or over at your boss's house, you get in this weird space of like, is this an informal way where we are having a conversation? Because it's people that I work with, do I still need to sort of be on with regard to my professional demeanor? Or can I, relax a little bit? And the rules are never entirely clear. All right. When you travel for conferences, right? If you go on a 3-day weekend business trip, Friday to Sunday, right? Do I have to be professional for all 3 days straight, right? Or, am I allowed to sort of explore the city when I'm not doing work stuff? Can I explore the city? Can I relax a little bit? Can I, I don't know, maybe go to a casino and bet on a game? Like what is and isn't appropriate? It gets very blurred. All right. We talk about informal ways that, where communication happens in work. There are these things, you're thinking about things like happy hour, or, you and your colleagues getting together on a weekend to watch a football game. These help to strengthen the relationship part of the group, but you also recognize that the only reason that I'm hanging out with these people in the first place is because we were put together for a task with regard to our job. So again, we start to see these blurring of lines between I come and do a new job, it's task oriented, but then I start to make friends with people, right? And we start to hang out a little bit more. And so there are these informal ways in which you start to meet your colleagues. All right, these are all things that we're all trying to navigate. There's no sort of hard and fast rule for it. And again, especially in the age of social media, the biggest thing I could just say to you is, you should probably treat your social media accounts as if your boss is going to look at them. Or your professors, right? Especially if you're like looking for letters of recommendation. It's unfortunate. I do think, there are fun ways to kind of be on the internet. I'm not talking about being hateful, but I'm talking about just like fun, stupid ways that people are on the internet. That, sort of let your hair down kind of moments. But unfortunately, context and the shortness of the internet, right? It's like 100 character tweet or whatever. Like, there's probably a lot more context to that. Maybe it's an inside joke, and that a lot of things can go in all sorts of different directions without the full context of a face-to-face conversation. So, if you're a college student, I would just be careful with what you post and act as if potential employers are going to look at it. And the thing is that they do. They get hundreds of resumes for one job, and some of the first things they do is they start sort of Googling you and see, you have a LinkedIn page, you have a Facebook account, you have what, okay. They start to look at this information, and if you're a person who, you might be a great person, you might be great for the job, but if you just have a lot of nonsense all over your Facebook page, their impression is this person worth the hassle down the line when we can find somebody else who has comparable skills, but they don't have this social media uh, imprint that is might not put the company in the best light, we'll say. All right, so just be careful with what you post online, because employers do read that stuff. All right. Excuse me. All right. So with regard to communication networks, they can either be vertical, so we're talking about power distance here, or they can be horizontal, so the power distance can be more flat. All right, there's always questions of what's called power distance. All right, so if you can take this metaphor, right, but think of it in a very literal way. So if you think about a big office building, right, you have people working on the ground floor, right, starting in the mailroom, starting in the basement, and then the CEOs are on the top floor, right? Think of it like that. It doesn't have to be a literal building, but that's how power distance work, right? And what a lot of companies are trying to do is they're trying to figure out what's the balance. You don't want a power distance that's so great that the people at the bottom feel completely isolated from the people at the top, and you don't want the people at the bottom to feel like they have no say in the company, because if the people at the bottom don't feel like they have a say in the company, then they don't have a buy-in to the company. So even if I'm a person working in the mailroom, I still want to feel like I'm a part of the company because I have loyalty to the company. And it's not loyalty in like the mafia loyalty, but it's loyalty with regard to I'm going to do my job well because I care about the reputation of this company. And I'm going to do my job well because I plan on sticking around and having a career at this company. One thing that people never tell you, or like bosses don't tell you that much, is that it's really hard and difficult and expensive to hire new people, right? And it's always a risk. Every time you hire a new person, it's a risk. So once a boss hires you, they want to keep you. They really do, right? You have to remember, you were chosen out of who knows how many resumes they had like on their desk, um, and and it's a few months process to hire someone, right? With all of the hoops you have to jump through, and there's HR and there's screening candidates. If it's across the country, they might have to spend money to fly you out and three or four other candidates out to like an on-site interview, right? They could spend an entire year's worth of your salary just in the hiring process with flying people around, and then all of the work hours it requires to have HR people go through resumes. Like, it's expensive. So the CEOs don't want the people who are entry level to feel disconnected from the company because they don't want those new hires to leave after 6 months. All right, they want you to thrive in their company. They want you to feel connected to the company. All right, so there's this balancing act of, look, there needs to be power distance, right? The people at the top are the competent people who, are the head of the company. They probably have more years of experience in the company, right, than you do, right? So they're going to be making they're going to be making the risky decisions, but they're also going to take responsibility when a risky decision goes bad, right? But at the same time, like, they don't want so much distance that you feel disconnected. So we're trying to figure out like how much distance are there between the people at the very top and the people at the very bottom, and how, what's that power distance look like? Okay. So here we go. Many people dislike vertical hierarchies, and the reason is pretty obvious, right? Especially if you're at the bottom of the hierarchy, you don't like the top of the hierarchy. But again, the top of the hierarchy exists because the people who are there are probably people who've been with the company for a long time, so they've learned, they've got promoted. Now they can be responsible for a few entry level people, right? So and the thing is like hierarchies Hierarchies might stay the same, but the people in different roles within the hierarchy, there is overturn. So this is one of like the weird things that gets talked about sometimes when people say like the 1%, we don't like the 1%. The thing about like the 1% or people of any income bracket is that it's not the same people every year, right? There's turnover, and you might not like the fact that you are a college student who's not making any money now, but you have to remember that the people who are above you in the tax bracket, it's like you're going to be there one day. And the people who are at the top of the tax bracket, they might lose a little bit of money, or they're going to retire, or they're going to die, right? It's like there's turnover with where people are in the hierarchy. So there's a hierarchy between people who are entry level workers and CEO of companies. So the hierarchy is the same, but the people jump around, right? With regard to like, I started entry level, then I became management, then I'm upper management, now I'm a partner, I'm a CEO, right? Maybe after a while being a CEO, I wanted to move on to something else, so I quit my big time Wall Street job and I went and did a private practice for less money, but it was less stress. Like, people change in this hierarchy all the time, right? But hierarchies exist so that there's some way in which we can, have goals, right? If the CEO made the same as the people working in the mailroom, nobody would want to be a CEO because that's a lot of work, right? I'd rather be working in the mailroom because it's less demanding as far as risk versus rewards. Yeah, I might be putting in the same amount of hours every day, but I don't want the pressure of, if I screw up, like, this entire company is going to fall apart, right? So there does need to be some sort of hierarchies there. Okay. The other thing to remember is that not all hierarchies are created equal. So for instance, right, a monarchy, so somebody, a country that has a king at the top of it, right? And a republic, right? So a democratically elected republic, which is what the United States is. You elect your president, for instance. These are both hierarchical forms of government, right? The king is the top person in a monarchy. The president is the top person of the executive branch in a republic, right? So those are both hierarchies with regard to government, but they're not equal. Because obviously, with regard to a republic, there's a democratic process where people get to vote. There's checks and balances with regard to power. In a monarchy, it's like somebody was born into a family and they just get to be king, whether or not they're competent, whether or not they're compassionate, whether or not they're good at their job. And there's no way to get rid of that king unless you have some sort of bloody revolution, right? Or somebody assassinates the king and assumes the throne, right? So not all hierarchies are the same. Some hierarchies are put in because of tyrants, like a monarchy, right? Where kingdoms fight each other and then some guy's like, I won, so I get to be the king. Some hierarchies are put in place because of, because we all voted to put somebody in charge of us for a while, right? Not for life, but, for a 2, 4, 6-year term, right? Or a hierarchy is based on competence. So it's like, you did a good job. You've been at this company for a couple of years. You seem to know the company. Let's try to give you a little bit more responsibility to the company by giving you a promotion, right? And you are more competent than the person who just got the job last month, all right? So depending on how the hierarchy gets situated, then you can judge whether or not, the hierarchy is good or bad. All right. Okay. Lastly, we have this quote from G.K. Chesterton, and I don't know if this is a paraphrase of his entire idea or it's an exact quote, but the idea holds the same, right? And what he says is that the idea of his is don't ever take a fence down until you know the reason it was put up. And so in this, and this is a pretty well-known Chesterton idea, you might hear people talk about Chesterton's fence. This is what it's referring to. What Chesterton was talking about was there are a lot of people who go around and they see hierarchies or they see fences, they see organizations, and they don't like them. And they're like, I just don't like that thing because I know that thing is somehow excluding me, or I don't get to be a part of that thing, or I'm at the bottom rung of that thing. I'm in the mailroom of this company. Like, I'm not sort of like in the system yet. I don't feel a part of the system yet, or I'm so low rung in the system. I just don't like it. And so people start tearing stuff down, right? So they might see a fence in the middle of the field and they're like, oh, that fence is, creating this like arbitrary division between these two neighbors. Let's tear this fence down so these neighbors can just share the land together. And G.K. Chesterton's like, you know nothing about that fence. Maybe that fence was put up because, the animals on each farm like don't like each other, and if you take the fence down, they start fighting each other or biting each other or whatever. Maybe that fence was put up for a whole host of reasons, right? Keep certain animals out of a field, right, of crops, right? Hierarchies exist in companies, and when people say like, I don't like some big company, let's just tear down the whole system. Well, that hierarchy, like you might like it because it sort of makes things more level, right? Egalitarian. But also like there's some competency that comes with that there's going to be a lot of unintended consequences, right? So for instance, something like Amazon. I have plenty of critiques of Amazon as a company, but I also know that if I order something on Amazon, it's going to be at my door in the next 15 minutes because Amazon is that ridiculous with regard to, conquering the supply chain, right? They know what they're doing. They get low prices and things are at my doorstep within 10 minutes if I want them, right? That's how Amazon works, right? I have plenty of critiques of Amazon with regard to, labor stuff and, monopoly and pushing small businesses out of business. However, like I also don't just want to completely collapse all of Amazon and just tear it all down and then wake up tomorrow and be like, hey, there's certain things in my life that aren't working. Why can't they still get things to my house this quickly, or why are prices going up, or like there's a whole delicate balance ecosystem going on in lots of different organizations, and you can't just tear it down because you don't like it. Maybe a less business model would be something like an athletic team. So let's say that there's a coach who's a real, what, he's just a real pain, like he's a real bastard, right? But let's say he's been coaching for 20 years, and in those 20 years, he has a couple of championships, and he always has a winning record. And then you're the freshman who comes into that coach's world, and that coach is yelling at you, and he's, like metaphorically, like beating you down, and you feel awful. And you're just like, I don't like this coach, and I want him to leave, like, and you try to get this coach fired. You might get him fired, but then you also might realize that there might have been a method to his madness, right? There might have been, then your whole team might fall apart. Maybe nobody tries hard in practice anymore. People don't feel the pressure to work hard in practice, so you start losing games. Nobody wins championships anymore, right? So there is some, if you have a system and that system is creating the results, but you still don't like the people at the top of the system, you have to think like, do I want to tear down this whole system? Because if I tear down this whole system, some of those good things that came out of the system, those things are going to go away, right? Now, some of the bad things, I'm not going to get yelled at by a coach anymore. I could have a smiley, happy coach in my face every day telling me how great I am. But maybe sometimes I need to get yelled at by my coach, right? Maybe sometimes like it's important, there's some important lessons in there that actually, foster a championship environment, all right? So you just always want to sort of look through the entire process. You weren't there when the fence was put up. You weren't there when Amazon was created. You weren't there when the banking system was created. You weren't there when, certain forms of government were created. Study, study, study why and how those systems, those hierarchies were put into place before you start just saying like smash the whole thing down. All right. Plenty of systems need reform. This isn't a don't reform. Plenty of things need some reform. But you want to make sure that you fully understand the ins and outs, and maybe just kind of, unfortunately, like you got to tinker around the edges. You can't just go in and smash the whole thing down, because then there's chaos and you don't necessarily know how best to create a new system. All right. These systems that are in place took decades, if not centuries, to kind of get to some semblance of stability, and you coming in and just smashing the whole thing down and acting as if you're going to build it all up in, at the same time, right? It's like, I'll smash it all down on Wednesday and it'll be rebuilt by Thursday. That's not how systems work, right? It takes a long time for governments and organizations and businesses and banking systems. It takes a long time for them to have some stability, right? And even then, they're still a little wobbly. So you want to be very, very careful with just, trying to overturn the entire table. All right, and finally, with regard to creating culture within an organization, right, an organization's culture, right, it could be a larger culture. We've talked about this with regard to like a nation state, right, the United States, right? There's two things you need to know: myths and fantasy themes. Myths are stories that are shared, that are a reflection in the past. Fantasy themes are stories that are shared, that are sort of visions for the future, all right? So good leadership within an organization, within a culture, helps to shape the vision of that group, right? They tell a good story of where we come from, right? And they tell a good story about where it is we're going to go, right? Communities, they thrive on stories, so we have these shared narratives, we have these sort of shared hero stories, right? There's various heroes, certain religious figures that are important in different cultures, right? And we also have things known as like rites and rituals, so different sorts of you know, on a calendar we have different festivals, and we all kind of come around and we celebrate those festivals. You get in this question of like rituals, you could have like, you know, initiation hazing, like, even though you could say like that's not good, right? That is a part of some cultures or organizations with regard to, if you want to be a part of this group, we're going to make you go through some sort of initiation. And obviously it can cross the line into like harassment and hazing, which is not good. But these are things that groups do in order to make sure that you're a part of the group. So a myth, a shared story for the United States could be, you know, the founding fathers. You have these sort of leadership stories of you know, George Washington, you know, could not tell a lie, and crossing the Delaware and all this other kind of stuff, right? So we have this sort of like myth, right? This mythical past. And we have this fantasy theme, which you hear in like every 4 years presidential speeches. Like, if you elect me for president in the future, like everyone's gonna have an education and everyone's gonna have, you know, a nice house and a car, and everyone's gonna have like financial security, and, you know, the children are the future and all this kind of stuff. The presidential elections, the nominees are trying to create a narrative to tell you, if you elect me, here's the vision, right? And then you have to just decide like, which vision of the future do I want, or who do I think could actually lead us to the vision that, you know, he or she is sort of proclaiming, you know, we're going to get to. All right. So that's how creating culture works. Know the difference between myths and fantasy themes. Make sure you watch the other video, because that's about media bias, which I'm going to record and post next.